Okay, this is lesson 17, Algebra 1, alright? We're going to start talking about, we talked about product. What is a product? The product means the answer to a multiplication problem. So if I have 4xy, doesn't that mean multiplication? Yes, it's an indicated multiplication. Well, each one of these terms, each one of these symbols represents something. This represents the number 4. It's constant. These are variables that represent some number, depending on what we assign to them. Well, we also call them coefficients of the rest of the expression. So, for instance, 4 is the coefficient of x and y. X is the coefficient of 4y. Y is the coefficient of 4x. Okay, just like we can say 4x is a coefficient of y. 4y is a coefficient of x. And xy is a coefficient of 4. And basically that is all that we're saying. Now, we're saying that 4 is a constant number, so we actually call it a numerical coefficient. Okay? And then if we had an expression that didn't have any constants in it, so for instance, if I just had xy, those are called literal coefficients because there's no constant. But what we normally do, in this book will speak, that when they talk about coefficients, they're actually talking about the constant. So going forward, if I give you, if they list 3xz and said what's the coefficient, they're actually talking about the constant 3. Even though these others are considered technically coefficients, and this is considered a numerical coefficient, they tend to drop that when they're talking about algebra. So the rest of this book, when they're talking about coefficients, they're talking about the constants. So remember that. But technically it is the numerical coefficient, and it's a literal coefficient of its only variables. Okay, saying that, let's talk about what a term is. Okay, there's a term. For instance, it consists of a single variable or a constant, x or 5, single variable or a constant. Those are that's a term. It can be the product or quotient of a variable and or constant. So we could do 4x. Isn't that the product? Doesn't product mean multiplication? This is where terms and definitions are very important that you need to learn. So the product of a constant, a variable, or the quotient. Quotient means division, right? We can also use this one that says 4xy times a plus b over p and 3x plus 2y over p. Those are two different terms, right? This is one term. Why is that a term? Because we said the third rule is the indicated product or quotient of expressions that contain variables and or constants. Okay? So because it contains both, so these two are terms because they have a single variable or constant. This one's a term because it contains the product of a variable and or a constant. So the product, right? That's multiplication. And these two are terms because they contain quotients, right? Isn't this a division bar? It means division. So they contain the quotient of a variable and or constants. Yes? So this whole thing divided by p. This whole numerator divided by p. Okay? So those are terms. A term also can help us for many reasons to identify the expression when we're talking about a term and the expression. So let's look at this particular one right here. We have x plus 4xym minus 6p over x plus 2 minus 8. How many terms do you think we have here? Well, we actually have 4 terms. Some of you might have said 6, some of you might have said 1, some of you might have said 2. We have 6. We have 6 terms. The first term is this one. It's x. our second term is going to be 4xym. First, second, third. Our third is 6p over x plus 2. It's the whole thing. Okay? And our fourth term is 8. And if you notice that each term is separated by a plus or a minus. Alright? Now if you notice there's a minus here, and it's really important that you don't forget this negative, that this negative goes to the whole expression. So you have to write it like this and understand that negative goes to the whole term, not just the top, not just the bottom, it goes to the whole thing. So a good way to recognize this, what if we assign p to equal -4 and y to equal 1 in this particular problem? We have, okay, that's 6p over. So let's redo this. We keep this negative on the outside. What is 6? That means times, what, a -4 over, oh, this is supposed to be y, sorry. Okay, over 1 plus 2. Okay, we still have this negative right here. Alright, this means multiplication. 6 times, this means times when you have parentheses. Times a -4 is a -24 over 3. Then we have to take this negative and times it. What's -24 divided by 3? You have negative times a -8. Yeah, so now you're left with negative times negative, but simply your answer would be +8. So you have to be very careful when you have a negative and you've got a term that's complicated like this with other smaller terms inside within the term. We'll learn more about that later as we get further along in the school year. But right now it's just important that you recognize that negative goes to, you want to simplify the inside and then multiply it out to the term. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the distributive property. We had talked about earlier the commutative property and the of multiplication and addition. Basically, it says if you have the two terms in multiplication or addition, it doesn't matter which ones you add first. You can switch the order. It's not going to change the result of the answer. Well, now we're going to talk about another property called the distributive property. Basically, what it says that we're going to distribute. So let's look at this one. 4 times 5 minus 3. Basically, what that distributive property says that we've got to multiply this out. So we're going to take this times every term. We're going to see how many terms are inside that parentheses. Well, there's 2. Remember, we said this is a term because it can be a single constant or a variable. So it follows the rules. And just so you know, the rules that you need to take down for your notes, on page 75, 17b, it says terms of an algebraic expression. You've got 3 things, so you write those in your notes. So, well, because they're all numbers, we can easily go use our property, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, order of operation, which would say 5 minus 3 is 2, and I'm going to get 8. Or I can use what's called the distributive property, which says I have to take this and multiply by every term inside the parentheses. So the first term is 5. 4 times 5 is 20. 4 times a -3 is -12. What's 20 minus 12? It's 8. I get the same result. I get the same answer no matter what I do. So the distributive property, if you look on page 76 at 17c, says for any real numbers a, b, and c, a times b plus c is equal to ab plus ac. Okay? Now, if you extend this, basically what it's saying is if you have a times b plus c plus d plus e plus ... then it's also equal to AB plus AC plus AD plus AE plus A ... Does that make sense? Meaning, if there's 1, 2, 3, 4 terms inside the parentheses, this has to be multiplied by all 4 terms. And don't forget the sign is attached. It's to the left of the variable or number. Okay? So let's look at example 17.1. Let's use our distributive property. And let's do the example. It's 4 times 6 minus 2 plus 5 minus 7 equals what? Well, let's distribute. 4 times 6 is 24. 4 times a negative 2, you can't forget the sign, is negative 8. 4 times positive 5 is a positive 20. 4 times a negative 7 is a negative 28. And now we can simply simplify. 24 and positive 20 is 44. Negative 28 and negative 8 and negative 28 is a negative 36. And 44 minus 36 is simply 8. Okay? So that's all the distributive property is. So we can do the same thing with variables. So let's look at example 17.3. So we have x minus 3y plus xz mp. Remember, this parentheses means everything inside of it is multiplied by anything touching it. So that means this all means everything in here times m and p. And because of our commutative property of multiplication, says I can rewrite this, right? So we said a times b is the same as b times a. It doesn't matter which order you do that, because it's commutative property of multiplication. So now let's take this. Well, we're going to take MP and multiply it. How many terms are inside? There's 1, 2, 3. So let's take times the first term. Then it's simply MPX. MP times negative 3y is going to be minus, you keep that sign, 3. It's only because it's a coefficient of 1 times 3. And then MPY. Plus, coefficients are 1. 1 times 1 is 1. And then it's simply MPXZ. So we've distributed to every term in here. Does that make sense? So let's do, and because this is implied 1, we don't need to write that there. Okay, let's use example 17, do example 17.4. It says use the distribute property to expand. So negative 3 times 2x minus 4. Okay, you're taking this whole thing times every term. There are 2 terms inside this. Negative 3 will be multiplied by each one. You don't just do negative times 3 times that and then positive 3 times that. You have to keep that negative each time. So negative 3 times 2x, you multiply the constants or coefficients as we call them, which is 2 times 3, which is 6, and negative times a positive, so it's negative, and then x. And then negative times a negative is a positive. 3 times 4 is 12. So your answer is simply negative 6x plus 12. So once you do all the practice problems, which are A through E, and your code word for this lesson is, I want on the top of your homework of lesson 13, homework, I want a smiley face in the top right hand corner. If it's on there, you'll get extra credit for your on your test. If it's not, you get 10 points taken off your homework. Okay? Thank you.